Hi, I'm Andrea and welcome to Productive C#. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use C# in order to deploy a virtual machine or any resource to Azure programmatically. So here I have my Azure portal open and I'm about to create a virtual machine. So I clicked virtual machine, add a new virtual machine, specified all the parameters I want for my virtual machine using the wizard, and I'm about to create a virtual machine. But I'm not gonna do that because I want to create these VMs in an automated way using C#. So I want to use this wizard only as a way to help me to define how I want my virtual machine. Here on the bottom you can see that there is download a template for automation, and if I click on this link, Azure automatically creates for me an Azure Resource Manager template that define exactly all the resources that are required in order to be able to deploy this virtual machine. Resources like the storage, the disk required, the network, and anything like that, the IP address and stuff like that. And also provides the parameters as a JSON file that contains all the information I provided specifically for this deployment, like for example the name of the VM, the public address name, the name of the resource group where I want to deploy, my username, the password has been removed from the file, and so on. So there are two JSON files automatically created for you. One is the template that define the virtual machine and all the resources required to be, and the parameters is the file that contains all the values that will be used in order to be able to deploy this virtual machine. Then Azure helps you to write the scripts in using the Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, or .NET or Ruby in order to deploy this VM. Of course, we are interested in .NET, and I click .NET. This class called Deployment Helper is being automatically generated by Azure, and we can use it in order to be able to deploy the VM. Just before doing that, I want to briefly tell you what the Azure Resource Manager is. Effectively, the Azure Resource Manager is the component inside Azure that is responsible for doing the deployment and managing Azure. So you can write scripts that talk to the Azure Manager, authenticate into it, and then you can create any Azure resources programmatically. So it's really a very important component of inside Azure. And the ARM templates are simply JSON files that allows you to declaratively describe what resources you want to create, and then you can just simply give these JSON files to the Azure Resource Manager that will make it happen. So we'll make and create all the resources that you need. Okay, right. So if you go back to the Azure portal and you click download, Azure will pack all these files for you inside a template. You can double click it and you can see that there is the two JSON files, the C# file class that we are interested in, and there are also the PowerShell and the other script that we are not interested in. Okay, I've already created a Visual Studio solution here with the two JSON files added and deployment helper in there. Okay, so I want to run this one and I want to show you what happened. Then I can quickly describe you what you need to do in order to be able to run it, because it's not as easy to configure. But let's try to run it and see what happened. So when I run this, Azure is taking these two JSON files and then it's starting a deployment. We can look at the deployment if I go back to the portal by clicking on the resource groups. Click on my resource group that is Productive C#, click deployments, and then you can see that this deployment already succeeded. It's been very quick because I already created these resources before. But if you click on this, you will be able to see the status of the deployment, if this has been completed or not, and all the resources that has been created. If I go back in the console application, you can see the deployment status is succeeded. So all the resources being created for us. Okay, fantastic. Now let's go back to the solution and let me quickly show you the code and how you can configure it. So let's click on the deployment helper. So you need a bit of information in order to be able to authenticate into Azure and run this script. So the first piece of information you need is the tenant ID. So this is a GUID that represents your Azure Active Directory. If you go back to the portal, you can find this information inside the Azure Active Directory blade. You click on that, then you can click on Properties down here. And you can see here the directory ID. You can just copy that and stick it into the script. Next, you need to create an application and then get the client ID and the client secret in order to be able to authenticate as this application into Azure. So let's go back. You need to click on Azure Active Directory again, click on App Registrations. You need to click New Registration and create a new application. I already created that one here. It's called Productive C#. If I click on that one, inside Properties, Overview here, you can see the application ID. So this application ID is effectively the same GUID that you need to copy inside the client ID. Okay? Then you need to create a client secret. You need to go back here, click on Certificates and Secrets. Inside Client Secrets here, click New Client Secrets. That will generate a new secrets that I created it already here, and you can copy the value here once and stick it inside the client secrets. Next, you need to provide a subscription ID that you can find if you go in the subscriptions blade. Click on subscriptions, you can see your subscription and copy the subscription ID here. And next, you need to provide the resource group where you want to deploy this virtual machine, the resource group location, in my case at the South UK, and the deployment name, that is just a string that is what we see when we actually deploy on Azure. And of course, you need to provide a template path and the parameters path, that are the two JSON files that contains all the information required in order to be able to deploy the VM. Okay, let's have a quick look at the code. I just slightly refactored this code in order to make it easy to understand, but it's effectively the same code that Azure provides to you directly. So first of all, you need to do a login into Azure using the tenant ID, the client ID, and the client secrets. You create a resource management client, passing the credentials and the subscription ID. Then we use the API in order to check if the resource groups exist, and if it doesn't, we'll recreate this resource group. And then it's creating a deployment object, taking the two templates as JSON objects. So we have this read file as a JSON method that read from the path and create a JSON object. It takes the template and the parameters. Then is using deployment create or update in order to create the deployment and deploy effectively, start the deployment on Azure. So this is effectively fairly simple code, and we don't need to actually write the code because Azure already provides the code for us. The only and most annoying part is actually having configuring all the information required in order to be able to properly authenticate. In addition to what I've shown you, you also need to make sure that the application has the proper rights in order to be able to create the resources that you want to do. Obviously, the role-based authentication is beyond the scope of this video, but at the very least, you can just click on the subscription and make sure the application is, if you click on the subscription, the application is the owner of the subscription. So you click on access control and you can add a role assignment, and you can make sure that you give the owner role to the application that you want. In my case, the application was Productive C#, and you can click Productive C# and you add the owner role to the subscription. This means that your application, Productive C#, in this case, is the owner of the subscription, so it can effectively do anything on the subscription. This is obviously the less restrictive way of giving access to your Azure resources. But obviously, you can lock down and make sure the application has only the permission required in order to be able to do its job. And this is effectively it. So this is how you can use C# in order to deploy a virtual machine in Azure in a programmatic way using C#. And of course, in this example, I'm only creating a single virtual machine, but there's nothing stopping you to simply load the parameters file, change some values like the name of the machine, and generate like 10 hundreds virtual machine completely in a complete automatic way. So the Azure Resource Manager is a very effective way to automate your deployments on Azure. And the great things that you have this API in .NET, and you can use C# to automate your Azure deployments. Thank you very much for watching.